I welcome everyone to this discussion. I'm having a special guest today, Fiona Ryan. Or I hope I pronounce, is it Ryan or Ryan?
Ryan.
Ryan. Okay, sorry about that. And she is
It's
a
fine.
political activist, and her goal is to shape the Western politics to be more open to diversity. And she is someone that I have found to be very intelligent, and she knows what she's saying. I do follow her on TikTok, and so she's going to be enlightening us on so many things today. I will try to not to take too much of her time and your time. I want you to listen attentively, and also you are free to um, put your questions. If it's on my platform or on her platform, you can put your questions there, and hopefully she would answer them by message. So, Fiona, you are welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you, David. Hello, everybody.
And can you just give a minute, just tell us about your work?
Well, thank you for giving me this time, really, because most of my connection with people is in sort of 3-minute TikTok videos. And I get a lot of comments, often from other Westerners who seem to think that my focus is on some sort of altruistic, I want to I want to be a voice for Africans. I want to be a voice for Russians, or I want to be a voice for the Chinese. And that's actually not my angle at all. Partly because I don't feel that any of those people need my voice. I think that Western people need my voice. And the reason for that is because we've essentially forced everyone to play this globalist colonial pirate game, yeah, and we are now losing it. And I think that's one of the first times in history that we can absolutely say that we are losing this game. I think from a British perspective, we've perhaps already got some experience of that. We've already had the kind of fall of the British Empire. But how many people are we seeing at the moment who are just becoming aware of, for example, what the French have been doing in Africa, and who are saying things like, oh, well, this was all in the past, and I'm like, no, this is still happening right now. And now with the formation of the African Union, with the formation of BRICS, these countries which, whether we like it or not, have more resources, more potential, more people than us, are forming together. And we will be left behind. So although I do get a lot of, and I think it's very convenient for Westerners to kind of go, oh, she's just another one of them do-gooders, Actually, my focus is far more selfish than that. I want my children to live in a world where we are which we are part of, and that we're not part of for being colonialist or being in control, which we're just a part of because we're also human beings.
Yeah. And for those of you joining in, we are discussing eugenics, we're discussing France, we're discussing Europe and Africa relations, and the dumbing down of society. Now, there's this crazy politician we had at a time in Nigeria who said while campaigning, if a lady is being raped and she feels she can't get away, she should just sit back and enjoy it. And so that was a very silly statement he made to convince people to just let go of whatever is going on in society. But we are to resist. We are to resist evil. The Bible says, resist the devil. First says, submit yourself to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. So how if you feel the devil is so scary, the devil is actually more scared of you. We are more than them. And that is why they need divide and conquer. And from my own observation of history, there has been a minority that are bent on controlling and destroying humanity. And they can't do it except by the complicity of the very people they are trying to destroy. So they employ divide and conquer. They employ the use of propaganda. And that brings me to the first question. What's eugenics?
Well, interestingly, eugenics and propaganda have a very rich and combined history, because propaganda was a book written by Freud's nephew, and Freud was the tutor of both Hitler and Stalin. So sounds like a joke, doesn't it? Freud, Hitler, and Stalin walk into a pub, but it may well have happened, you know. Yeah. And actually, the Eugenics Society was formed in Berlin in the 1920s, and it was mostly Jewish doctors, European Jews rather than Semites. It was mostly Jewish doctors, and they had very wild ideas about population control and about bloodlines. And actually, an awful lot of the real horrors that we've seen from the medical side of Germany at that time, I'll try not to be specific on wording here, for obvious reasons, actually comes from those men and what they determined. So you have obviously the well-known military side of Germany at that period of time. You have far less well-known medical side of Germany at that time. And fundamentally, the reason why we have kept that side hidden is for propaganda purposes. You know, if people knew that when they were, for example, profiling their blood type, that they were doing so based on research from a concentration camp in Hungary, based on mostly 13 to 15-year-old Slavic boys and girls, they might be less inclined to see that as a wonderful medical marvel, and in fact see it as something a little bit darker. The whole concept of determining people's strengths and weaknesses based upon physical attributes really is connected to that. And propaganda has been hugely useful in allowing those things to happen. So if you can manipulate the society into seeing people as good, regardless of behavior, regardless of who they are, or rather, should I say, in reference to this, bad, in regard, you know, irrespective of behavior, irrespective of who they are. Well, they're Jewish, therefore they must be bad. You know, that's a classic example, you know, from that period in time. And we know that resulted in the Holocaust, you know. Yes. You then have the opposite of that, which is these people are good and nothing that they do can be bad. That is the basics of propaganda. And it is the basics of eugenics. Okay. And they really are the same thing. And I think a lot of people don't fully understand that these concepts that that are given to us as separate are in fact very much what I would say 20th century European ideology.
Yeah. And just for those who may quickly try to drown the wisdom she's dishing out by saying she's anti-Semitic. Moses, the one who wrote the Torah, is recorded in the Torah as marrying two women. One was an Arabi, as it is said in the Middle East. Her name was Zipporah. The second woman Moses married was a Black African, an Ethiopian woman. So in Exodus chapter 2, verse 21 to 22, we see the record of Zipporah, the Midianite, so an Arab. And in the book of Numbers, chapter 12, we see Moses got married to an Ethiopian. And when his sister and brother spoke against him in private, God judged them. Miriam, his sister, was judged with leprosy. And before something got to Aaron, his brother, both of them had to beg Moses to pray for them. So you see that God, Almighty God, hates eugenics, hates racism, and the typical Jew isn't racist, because Moses, we can see, married two women, neither of which was from his own tribe or race. So Fiona is right on point. And let me just say, these races we know we all have things in common. We're really not different. We just have different skin tones and some minor feature differences because of the environment we are in. And so we are all human.
I would actually disagree with that.
Okay, enlighten me.
I would disagree with that on the basis that I feel like racism and xenophobia, both as concepts, have been hugely misrepresented in the hearts and the minds of most people. So I am quite able to say that as a white human being, I probably have different attributes to a woman who is black, you know. For example, women who are black tend to have very, very wide hips, even wider than white women. Therefore, they are much more capable at giving birth without medical support than white women. Now, this is that to me, that's the most powerful thing you can have. It really is. That's the strongest human attribute that is possible to gift life to the world. Now, I'm reminded of a conversation I literally just had last night with a friend of mine. Actually, we were talking. She's Chinese, British, and we were talking about this concept of all Asian people looking the same. You know, that old trope. And actually, if you look into it, every race sees other races as the same. So they see similarities in other races and they see differences in their own. And when they've picked this apart, they find that, you know, black people see facial shapes as like huge definers of what makes people look different. Whereas white people are more drawn to the color of eyes or the color of hair, for example. And, you know, I said to her, you know, white people might say Asian people all look the same, but at least they don't all think the same like white people, you know, because we do. There is this real lack of kind of critical thought. But what we end up with is we end up with this weaponizing of what I would call tribalism. I think it's very, very natural to want to exist within your tribe, to want to enjoy seeing people like you know, and like Genoa said to me, when her little girl, she's married to a white British man, when her little girls see a mixed race Asian family on the TV, they're ecstatic because it's somebody that looks like them, you know, and they love that. And that's why it's so important that we're aware of our kind of cultural historical backgrounds and also the differences that are in those. But I think that what happens is we live in a world where those differences are weaponized, and we're told that even to point them out means that we're racist or we're xenophobic or there's a phobia, there's an ill will, you know. And what that ends up doing is leads to situations like I quite often see from Black Americans, where they'll say you're not allowed to have braids in your hair, or you're not allowed to wear that Ethiopian sari that you bought in Ethiopia from an Ethiopian, probably giving money to somebody who needed it, who made that for you, because it's cultural appropriation for a white person to do that. Now, when I traveled around the world, I quite happily purchased things from all sorts of different people, which I wore gladly and I still wear, to turn it on its head. So it's not even just society, but it's actually Black people who are saying, no, you mustn't appreciate any culture that's not your own, it actually removes massive amounts of ability for us to understand each other, you know?
Yes.
And it's because we're not able to appreciate our own tribalism, you know? Yes, this is my home. I live in England. I am mostly surrounded by white people. That's not uncomfortable for me at all, because I am white. But is race just skin deep? Absolutely not. You know, black people, as I said, black women much better at giving birth, black men more usually much better at running, white men better at swimming, not better at much else, I'm going to have to say, but that's the truth, you know. And I think that in not allowing the common person to actually talk about and discuss those differences as if it's actually normal to feel them and experience them and have a sense of, this is who I am, this is my tribe, and that's okay. I think that's what actually leads to racism, rather than the opposite. I don't know how you might feel very differently about that, but that's how I see it.
I believe we are saying the same thing, but I want to explain where I was coming from. Being a minister of the gospel, I see things from that spiritual angle, and man is a spirit that has a soul living in a body. All right. So when I say we are the same inside, I was coming from that angle that we are all spirits brought forth by God's word, and we have our personalities, our soul, and we live in our body. Our bodies are different in abilities. And so I think we are saying the same thing. Now, if we are to go from here, why do you think that there is this push to have a clash of races?
Well, I think you've already said it. It's about divide and rule, isn't it? Because, you know, look at what's happening. Look at what's happening in France. I mean, I've had a bit of a tough week anyway for personal reasons, but I've been absolutely horrified with how quickly people have rushed to this mindset that the reason that there's issues in France is because it's black people, or because those black people may or may not be Muslims. And the reason for that is twofold. One, I think it shows a real underlying, real negative view of black Muslims, which I think is absolutely disgraceful. I don't think there's any reason for that. But also because it avoids the point, doesn't it? It's a very, very convenient step for the riots in France, which, let's face it, have been going on for months. They didn't start with the death of an Algerian boy. They started months ago in Paris. Paris was on fire for like 3 months, with mostly white people protesting, and they said that was about pension reform. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was about the cost of living. It was about how pushed people in France are. And if you look at the inflation in France, there's a graph that shows the cost of food and the cost of and the amount of food people are buying, and they're polar opposites. People are actually being priced out of eating food in France because energy prices are so high, because, you know, and yet when their politician, the person who's supposed to lead them, which is Macron, to add insult to injury, stands up, all he talks about is a war in Ukraine. You know, he talks about giving more money to another country, whatever country they might be. That's going to upset people. And so that all happened, and I will often watch half an hour of the mainstream media just to see what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
You know, it's not mentioned. It's brushed over. Oh, it's the French rioting again. You know how they like that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, a black teenager's killed, and there's all of these stories about police brutality. And that is absolute. There's the angle. There's the angle where the mainstream media can take this so they can avoid what the real problem is.
Yeah.
And if we look at what the real problem is the cost of living in Europe. It is the authoritarianism in Europe. It's the fact that it doesn't matter what Macron does. Macron doesn't control France. The EU controls France. He just manages France terribly, but that's all he does. And actually, if you then go, say I'm a, French national, white French national, and you're a French national who's black, and I'm going, I'm angry about the cost of living crisis, and you're saying I'm angry about police brutality. Well, fundamentally, if we look at what the real core of the issue is, they're both the same: mismanagement. Yeah, a complete lack of cohesion between the government and the people. And if you then go further back and you say, well, hang on a minute, France owns 14 African countries' currency. Why on earth? People in France, by that logic, the people of France should be living in gold encrusted houses. There should be no crisis. This is a country that's not only fueled by the workforce of its own people, it's also fueled by the workforce of 14 other countries. Not for one moment suggesting that that's fair or correct. I think quite the opposite. Yeah. But from a purely, a purely kind of non-critical perspective, France should be incredibly rich, no?
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes. You see, many people don't know this. Governments are actually just the mascots of corporate entities and super wealthy families. They use the governments to fulfill their programs, their plans. And so these people you think are the most powerful people in the world are just pawns in the chess game. Now, they are moving, or rather, let me put it this way, the cheapest prison to run is the prison that the prisoners are their own prison guards. If you can convince the prisoners to become prison guards to themselves, all you need to do is sit back and enjoy the show. And so race is being weaponized.
Oh, yeah.
The various races fighting each other and not to see what is really going on. The theft of their resources and the economic crisis resulting from it. Let me give this look at history. The Americans at a time were involved in slavery, all right? The wealthy families convinced the poor white men that the black slaves should remain slaves and made them feel important. But you see, those racist white men were poor because their labor was cheapened by the fact that there was free slave labor. So the only group that benefited were the slave owners. Because why will you pay a white man $1 for what you can get for free? So to enforce their own greedy policies, they got those poor white folks to fight the black folks and keep them enslaved, and they got cheap, the wealthy ones got cheap labor and continued living comfortably, having hired cheap security guards to guard them against their black slaves. When slavery was abolished, then the standard of living increased, because then we now had more space for economic forces to act. There was no more free labor, so people had to be paid, and then they could negotiate their wages because everyone now got into the workforce. So it's a scheme. It's a grand heist of the people's resources. And there was a conference. I don't know if you know about it, Fiona. There was the Berlin Conference of 1884. I think November till about January or February 1885, where the European powers came together, convened by Otto von Bismarck of Germany. They convened this meeting together to divide the African continent amongst themselves. And that conference is still at work right now, because the French, they hold those African countries hostage. The British hold the English-speaking African countries hostage, because though they may not demand 80% of their foreign reserves in their banks, but there are some policies that they determine, all right? So this is one. And then the people in, the European people, the average European people do not know what is really going on. Because
and this is entirely why I am, belligerently loud, because I honestly believe that the majority of people, and I think that actually, if you look at what's happening with the African Union, and you look at what's happening with the Arab Union as well, it's like all these countries that we in the West have been told are, barbarians, they'll never get on, they need us to support them. As soon as there's been an opportunity for peace, they line up peace. And I think the majority of people do. But I suppose when I look at European history, which is a massive interest of mine, it's what my degree was in, I did a geopolitical degree a few years ago and focused very much on this period of time. And you look at, someone asked me the other day, they said, has France got democracy? And I said, well, when's France ever had the time to have democracy? There was there was a Chinese foreign minister was asked in a visit to France a few months ago. They said to him, what do you think of the French Revolution, which of course was 1776? And he said, brilliant line, he said, it's too early to tell. Yeah. Because that's how the Chinese see time. They see time so differently to us. They look at things in terms of generations rather than years. And so it's too early to tell what the result of the French Revolution will be. We're not through the fallout of it yet. So the French Revolution, 1776, and then we had essentially that went on for years and years. Then Napoleon came and did his thing, massive unrest in France. Then in the end of the 19th century, you had massive wars with Spain, all these colonial wars over in Africa, people living very provincial, very insular lives in France, everyone very, very poor. Unlike, as you've said, the very, very wealthy who are making all of this money from slavery and all the other stuff. And then you have the First World War. So it's like, if you've only just managed to overthrow your monarchs and then you go straight into a war like less than 100 years later, how on earth have you got an opportunity therefore for democracy? Then you have the Second World War, and of course the Second World War resulted in massive German invasion and everything like that. And then the second France came out of the Second World War, they went straight into the European Union, which is absolutely anti-democratic. So France has never had this democracy of which they preach, and also the common French person has never really had this wealth of which they have attempted to say is there. And I really want people who are in like my position, poor Europeans, to be saying, well, there's been all of this looting, there's been all of this money taken from African countries. Like you've just said, our labor, our resources, our minds have been cheapened by the fact that there's so much cheaper labor available elsewhere. This has ruined our lives as much as it's ruined anybody else's. So the best thing is if we are all together, me, you, all of us together to actually fight against what the real problem is, rather than this pitting against each other. And when I see the French riots and I think, wow, you've got a bunch of, African migrants rioting with, white European French nationals. They are rioting for the same reasons. You're not going to have riots in a country where the standard of living is good and they feel like they're secure and that the police are working for them. All of these people are rioting for the same reason. So the best way is to get them to fight each other.
Yeah. And you see, the reason why we're having this issue of migration into Europe is because not the Europeans, not the average Europeans, but the governments on behalf of the corporations are destabilizing African nations around the world. They are destabilizing them, keeping them from moving forward. There was a conference in 1972 where some European powers came together and said they would not allow Africa to develop because of the resources. But you see, just as we have some characteristics that are different from each other, when you look at all the continents on Earth, you can actually fit them together as one. If you look the shape of Africa, the shape of South America, if you put it together, it fits. The shape of Europe, putting it together just like that, it forms something.
Yeah, Canada and Norway, they slot together.
I believe that our different characteristics, abilities, skills, and gifts were designed by God to profit each other.
Complement,
to complement each other. Now, the Europeans, when it comes to technology, are very good, better than Africans. But Africans have the resources. So all we need to do, for example, is just a trade, and both parties are happy. Bring in, there are parts of the world that are very good at medicine. I believe the Indians, the Chinese, we just come in, work together. These resources have been shared. I believe in God Almighty, because I don't think I came from it. My ancestors came from monkeys and monkeys came from bacteria. No, that's nonsense. If not, my phone would be able to evolve into a car. So I believe that our various skills come together to complement each other. But there are a few who are so crazy about power and whose humanity is still in doubt, that want to control these resources, and so they pitch human beings against each other. In fact, in the Bible, it says it's a sign of the end in Matthew 24, verse 7. So I want you, we just have about 5 minutes. I want you to speak about how we can reverse the dumbing down of society. Our education system, our media has been teaching us to just listen to government, listen to professional bodies, don't use your head, just go to school, get a job, get your pension, and die. So how can we reverse it?
Well, I think, it's got to be about the children, hasn't it? My children are very much taught from a young age to think for themselves. But I feel like we have to really take a strong and sometimes uncomfortable look at some of the policies that our governments put in place, which creates this idea that to see things differently is racism, is xenophobia, is homophobia. Look what happened in Ghana. The Ghanaian people said, we don't want gay marriage to be a thing in Ghana. The Americans went wild. The Americans were like, no, we will sanction you unless you say that men and women are the same, And actually, an African man on one of my posts the other day said it just so succinctly. He said, democracy is sometimes uncomfortable. If people are going to be allowed to have self-determination, that might not always mean what you think it should mean, And I think that is absolutely the first step My tagline is diplomacy is free, because we put all of this money into wars when we should be building schools, you know. And it would be cheaper to do that. Yeah. It would be so much cheaper if everyone sat down and had a chat. Let's look at the Ukraine war. What's Putin actually asking for? Demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Well, to be honest, that's not that. Is it worth 400,000 men's lives for that to happen anyway? You know, and I think that what Africa needs to do is exactly what Africa's doing. You know, Africa has taken, I think, the best of the best. You know, I know Sergei Lavrov is hugely involved in creating the African Union. The Africans have said, "Yep, we'll take Swahili. That'll be our national language." I know that there's children now in China learning Swahili so that they can work and live in Africa. Yeah. It's a wonderful thing to see. I've got absolutely no doubt that Africa's time is rising, you know. My fear is not for Africa. My fear is for us, because we are just going to end up so very poor and so very alone. And if we cannot push this arrogant past nostalgia, and it's a nostalgia that 50 years ago or 500 years ago everything was wonderful because Britannia ruled the waves. I still hear people say that today. Great Britain. I'm like, what is great about it? Come on, you know. And I really, really hope that we can come to the table and actually discover in ourselves what we have to offer, which is more than piracy. Exactly. And yeah, I think that's, yeah. I don't think Africa's got anything to worry about, man. Seriously, I think that we have.
No, the average African nation is not war crazy. And that is why you hardly hear African nations fighting each other. African nations don't buy air defense systems. They don't bother about intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Africans just want to live, trade, enjoy nature. And so at some point, I believe the African continent is going to play a key role in world stability. Yeah. And if the collective West and Europe would simply respect our own views, it's going to be a walk in the park, because Africans welcome Europeans in. Come over, live with us. We are very playful and all, but that tension is not there. So I really would hope that people who listen to you will understand what you're talking about and really listen again to this video. And for those of you hearing me, because we have less than a minute, you can find Fiona on TikTok and YouTube. She's not much on Facebook, but go to TikTok. You see lots of good stuff there, because we don't want to keep you beyond your own convenient time. That's why the video is not so long. But I really would recommend that you listen to her on TikTok and YouTube. And Fiona, thank you for your time. You've said a lot in a short space of time, but I really appreciate it.
It's a shame we don't have longer, but maybe we can approach some of the other things another time.
Yes.
Lovely to chat to you, David. God bless.
We'll have another chat. Thank you very much. All right.